Back in the day, Disney was the undisputed king of theatrical animation. They were at the top of the industry since the very beginning, and no one could touch them. Nowadays, things are different, and the playing field has been evened out by quite a bit. But before Illumination, before DreamWorks, and before Pixar, there was a person who met Disney head-on and became their first true rival, Don Bluth. Now, many of you all probably know him from his incredible films, The Secret of NIMH, The Land Before Time, An American Tail, but you also probably know him for many of his bad films, Pebble and the Penguin, Rock-a-Doodle, and A Troll in Central Park.
It looks stupid!
Don and his team were the first to ever shake up the scene for Disney. Again, they were the kings of the industry, but Don was dead set on giving them a run for their money. This is a story of drama, betrayal, and passion, where titans of the industry clashed and fought for domination. And who was the victor?
Gosh, I don't know.
Yeah, a bit of a spoiler, but one that we all know. Regardless, the story of how it all went down is fascinating nonetheless. How Don climbed his way up in the industry, how he went head-to-head with Disney, and how it all came crashing down. He did something that no one was able to previously do, and he's truly one of the most interesting people to come from the industry. So let's take a closer look at what ruined Don Bluth animation. Our story begins in El Paso, Texas back in 1937. That's when and where Don was born, but he would soon after move to Payson, Utah, and worked on his family farm. During the time he had off, he would ride into town with his horse, and then go watch old Disney films, with Snow White being his favorite. That was the movie that inspired him to become an animator, to have the dreams and aspiration to one day work at Disney Studios. Now, Don's family moved around quite a bit, but they eventually found themselves close to Burbank, California. Finally, Don had his chance, and he submitted his portfolio of drawings to Disney Studios. Eventually, they would hire him, and Don worked as an in-between artist for different movies. Over time, he rose through the ranks and became an assistant animator at the studio. Another big factor in Don's life is his faith, since he's a Mormon. Despite landing his dream job and getting promotions, he went to Argentina for a mission trip and was there for over 2.5 years, essentially putting his animation career on hold. After he came back from his trip, he was eventually brought back into Disney and began work on films such as Sleeping Beauty, The Sword in the Stone, Robin Hood, and The Rescuers. But Don wasn't satisfied with the animation coming from the studio around that time. He saw the quality of their animations and thought that they were a far cry from what they once were, and that Disney was cutting corners to save money, which is absolutely true. They were doing that.
The mantra around the Disney studio was, we can't afford to do it anymore, it's too expensive. And I remember asking one of the animators, you know, in Fantasia, you've been here the whole history, how did you get that beautiful wet water in Fantasia where the little broom was carrying buckets, you know, and emptying water? How did you do that? And this guy, he said, I don't remember. And nobody wrote it down.
In an effort to recapture the old magic from Disney, Don and some of his Disney colleagues, such as Gary Goldman and John Pomeroy, wanted to recapture the old Disney style and magic. So they went off and worked on a private project called Banjo the Woodpile Cat. They did all of this animation in Don's garage, and it took them over 4 years to make, as it was finally released in 1979.
I'll stick with you, kid, you stick with me. Together we'll overcome adversity.
Banjo actually caught the attention of an investor who said he put money down for Don and his team to make their own animated movie. Don even told the Disney staff about the situation, to which, according to him, Disney laughed at his face, saying that making his own movie would be impossible.
That's when we went back to Disney's and said, we've been given an opportunity to go out there and make a movie and leave you here. And they laughed. It was a guy named Don Duckwall. He just laughed the loudest and he says, you can never do that. He says, you don't have an idea what you're even saying. You cannot make a feature film. We struggle to make one. And you think you can go out there and do it? He says, you'll fail.
At this point, there was no doubt that there was bad blood between the animators at Disney who supported Don, and then the other ones who thought he was foolish. and that there was no way that he could accomplish his goals. All of this drama would eventually boil over, and in September of 1979, Don and 17 other animators left Disney to go and form Don Bluth Productions. Here we go, folks. The gauntlet's been thrown down. In this corner, we have the old king veteran of the industry, Disney. And in this corner, we have the up-and-comer, Don Bluth Productions. May the best studio win. So Don finally had his own team and studio, and got to work on their first film, The Secret of Nim, an adaptation of the book Miss Frisbee and the Rats of Nim. Funny enough, Disney passed up on this story a decade earlier, but Don and his team believed that they could deliver on this concept, and they absolutely did. Real talk, this is one of my favorite animated movies ever made, and you can clearly see the heart and passion that went into this movie.
They must move your house to the lee of the storm.
No rat could move my house.
They have ways.
Now, the film was only a modest success at the box office, as it was competing with the juggernaut that was E.T., but it received a lot of critical acclaim within the animation industry. The next film that Don tried to make happen was something called East of the Sun and West of the Moon. But unfortunately for them, they did not have the money available to make this film, so it didn't happen. By the way, that's going to be a very common theme in this video. Financial issues. That stuff would follow Don like a curse.
Why me?
After The Secret of Nim, Don reformed his studio under the name of Bluth Group, and in 1983, they would work on 2 video games, the very successful Dragon's Lair and the less successful Space Ace. This work would be a godsend for Don and his studio, as the money from that project would keep them afloat. But they would run into more problems with the crash of the video game market in 1983, putting Bluth Group into bankruptcy.
Follow the rocky path! It will take you to the dragon's lair!
Where will the other one take me?
Space Ace!
Around this time, Don teamed up with Morris Sullivan and formed Sullivan Bluth Studios, which opened in 1985. That's another common theme in this video. Whenever Don loses one studio, he'll come right back at you with another. In 1984, Don was approached by the big man himself, Steven Spielberg. The two of them worked together to create An American Tail. With backing from Amblin Entertainment and Universal Pictures, the movie was released in 1986 and performed incredibly well, making over $47 million at the US box office alone. It was also the highest-grossing non-Disney animated film ever at that time. And the icing on the cake? They beat out Disney's own mouse-themed movie, The Great Mouse Detective, which I can only imagine was a huge blow to Disney.
I'm having a heart attack here.
An American Tail was the beginning of the golden age for Don, though this Renaissance period would be very brief. Around this time, Sullivan Bluth Productions moved over to Ireland to take advantage of some government incentives. After that, there was another movie from Spielberg and Bluth, The Land Before Time. Only the first one. The other, 20 are made by Universal Pictures. The Land Before Time 29! Fuck it, here's a dinosaur.
Yep.
The first Land Before Time was released in November of 1988, the very same day as Disney's Oliver and Company, which was a total power move and very stupid. But fortunately for Don, they beat Disney again. Maybe it's because kids think dinosaurs are cooler than Billy Joel. After The Land Before Time, Don and Spielberg went their separate ways. Spielberg would go on to form his own animation studio called Amblimation, and that was the studio that was responsible for the sequel to An American Tail, Fievel Goes West, to which Don Bluth did not work on. So here we are again. Don Bluth is looking for some money, and he was able to strike a deal with Goldcrest Films in 1988, as they would be the ones to help fund and distribute the films from their studio. After that, Don's team began production on All Dogs Go to Heaven. Now, many people see this film as the last good movie from Sullivan Bluth Productions, as you'll soon find out. It was released in November of 1989, once again going head-to-head with a Disney release. Except this time, the results were far different. Let's just say that Disney blew them out of the water.
Life's full of tough choices, isn't it?
It's so interesting to me how the Disney Renaissance began right around the same time where Don's animation renaissance was coming to an end. This would be the last time that Don would release one of his films the same day as a Disney film. Yeah, good idea. All Dogs Go to Heaven didn't do so well at the box office, but surprisingly, it did quite well when it was sold as a VHS. I think it was one of the highest selling videos of that year, which makes sense since VHS was a growing market at that time.
Let's make music together. Let's make sweet harmony.
Then we have Rock-a-Doodle in April of 1992, the film that would be the beginning of the end for Don and his team. This film bombed. Just absolutely bombed at the box office. And it even led to some animators leaving the studio. Goldcrest was even on the verge of liquidating the studio so that they could pay off some kind of loan. Yeah, it was getting that bad. In 1992, Sullivan Bluth Studios was renamed to Don Bluth Entertainment, and they were able to find new financial backers with Merlin Films and Hong Kong Media Assets, who gave the studio $14 million and purchased their next 3 films. Now, part of this deal was allowing these companies to give input and make changes in the production where they thought it was needed. Something that Don wouldn't like. But the guy was out of money, and he had no choice. So, did this investment pay off? No. Thumbelina? Failure. A Troll in Central Park? Big failure. The Pebble and the Penguin? Let's just say that Don and Gary didn't even want their names as directors on that film. There was a lot of back and forth with changes from their financiers. And honest to God, it was a situation where there were just too many cooks in the kitchen. That, and how all 3 of these movies suffered greatly from production issues. It's interesting, because Bluth often talks about how he should have stayed with Spielberg, as he always would have made sure that he had a good script. Oh well, shoulda, woulda, coulda.
Don't make me laugh. Or slap my knee.
In the early 90s, Don and Goldman were drawn away from the current animation studio and went to go set up a new animation studio for 20th Century Fox, called Fox Animation Studios. I actually made a video about this topic before, so go check it out if you want. With his new blood and change of scenery, Don and Gary would go on to make their first hit in almost a decade, with Anastasia. It was embraced by audiences and critics, and performed quite well. Though I gotta say, when you look at the premise of this movie and what actually happened in history, night and day, folks, just night and day.
Little Anya, beware, Rasputin's away.
Don did a great job and was finally back on his feet. He was able to have a successful launch for a studio and was finally getting back his momentum. He also worked on the sequel for Anastasia called Bartok the Magnificent. Bardock? I always say the guy's name wrong. Bardock the Magnificent. Okay, whatever, close enough. Fox Animation Studios was firmly established, and Don Bluth was back once again as a real competitor for Disney. He was like, hey Disney, you thought you got rid of me, but now I got this Fox guy who has my back, and I actually have money now. You're like, Anastasia? I totally didn't copy you guys. Shut up. And Disney's all like, we don't have the time to deal with you right now. We got this Pixar company that's right up our butt, and this Jeffrey Katzenberg guy is burning down the studios. We'll catch up with you later. Next for Don was Titan AE in June of 2000, which was a cool combination of traditional and computer animation. Also, this was Don's first real action movie, to which he hasn't really done since his video game days. It was an ambitious, new direction to take the studio, as the old Disney Renaissance formula was starting to dry out. Also, should be noted that Ice Age was originally developed for Don Bluth to make at Fox Animations, but he turned it down. Oh man, you really missed out on that one. I mean, it's not good, but it makes money, which is something that Don usually needs. But despite his ambitious approach to Titan, the movie was a complete failure and lost millions of dollars. It was so devastating that Fox Animation Studios closed up shop soon after. For Don, Titan AE would be his final time directing a theatrical movie. Nearly 20 years later, and he still hasn't returned. I think it's safe to say that this failure was the final straw that broke the camel's back. So, what ultimately brought Don Bluth down? Well, I think there are a couple of reasons. So let's run down the list. Number 1, he was prideful. Don wanted to beat Disney so bad that he released his own films on the same day as theirs, which is incredibly foolish. It makes so much more sense to avoid them. There weren't that many other studios releasing animated films at the time, so give them a wide berth and you would actually have less competition. This is like releasing Justice League the same day as the Avengers. It just doesn't make sense, and it's all for ego stroking. Fortunately, he backed off of that after Ariel spanked his ass at the box office. Number 2, his reputation went downhill. From Rockadoodle to A Troll in Central Park to Pebble and the Penguin, it became very clear that Don and his team were cursed. Now, he had his second chance with Fox Animation, and to be fair, the failure of Titan AE wasn't all of Don's fault. If anything, it was due to more of a shift in the animation industry, and that people were more interested in 3D films and not just 2D films. So in that regard, Don was just unlucky. But everything else in the early 90s? Yeah, that's on you, Don.
You got it, spaceman.
Oh no.
Number 3, he's a bit of a control freak. There is no question that Don likes to be in charge of his projects. He enjoys taking point and basically being in control of his movies. Now, this isn't necessarily a bad thing, but he did a poor job of sharing the load. He should have brought on other directors to take control and make their own movies, not just films that were just Don Bluth. Anything that came out of any Don Bluth studio was him directing it. He was always in charge. In hindsight, he should have done what Pixar did and bring on other directors and train them to make their own movies. This is a bit of a side note, but he also should have stuck it out with Spielberg. It's somewhat of a mystery why they broke up when their films were doing so well. Spielberg was clearly trying to get into animation around that time, and being partners with him probably would have worked out in the long run. I mean, that's what happened with Katzenberg and DreamWorks. Honestly, I wouldn't be surprised if this was because Don didn't want to be told what to do by Spielberg, to share his director's seat with such a big name. But I don't know, I can't confirm or deny this. It's all speculation.
See? I can take care of myself. All by myself.
Number 4, a change in the tone of his movies. This one's more of a personal opinion, but Don went from this to this, and I think that was a mistake. Yeah, I get it. He changed his tone so he could keep up with Disney and copy their formula. But look how that turned out. I sincerely wish he would have maintained the same kind of story and visual styles from The Land Before Time and The Secret of NIMH. Stuff that was a bit darker, but still fun to watch. But instead, we got this hot mess.
It feels delicious to be so vicious. I'm Ganoga, the queen of mean.
And finally, number 5, money issues. This poor guy lost money left and right. He even had to pay out of pocket a few times to keep his projects afloat. There were multiple times where he faced bankruptcy and would have to reform his company or jump to a new one. Don Bluth Productions, bankruptcy. Bluth Group, bankruptcy. Sullivan Bluth Studios, bankruptcy. Fox Animation Studios, they were closed. He was hemorrhaging money on his projects way too often. In hindsight, what he needed the most was a good business manager. Someone to say, maybe we shouldn't release our movie the same day as Disney, because that's really stupid and serves no point besides you saying, hey Disney, fuck you.
You'll never escape me, child.
At the end of the day, Don Bluth just couldn't keep his head above water and ultimately ran out of steam. So what's Don up to nowadays? Well, he and Gary Goldman opened up an online class for animation and have been doing that for a couple of years now. They also raised over $700,000 via Indiegogo to create a pitch presentation for a Dragon's Lair movie. Now, I'm not 100% sure where they are on this project as of now, It's been over 2 years since they raised their funds, and they don't have much to show of it. But it also takes time to make animated content, so I can understand the wait. Oh, and he also went back to visit Disney Studios. I guess all of that bad blood is just water under the bridge. But despite all of his ups and downs, one cannot deny how much Don has impacted the world of animation. He knew early on in his life that animation was his passion, and he definitely made his mark. Yeah, he isn't perfect, and he's made his fair share of mistakes, but the guy helped to create some of the best animated movies out there. He was also the first person to truly challenge Disney Studios, something that many people thought was impossible. But he proved to the animation world that they could be brought down, if only for the briefest of moments. Nowadays, Disney has many rivals, but they'll never forget their first. A stubborn Mormon kid from Utah who had a passion for animation and who never gave up on his dreams.